So we covered Conor McGregor's criminal behavior, we covered Khamzat Chimaev's criminal behavior, and now we're going to have a little look at Khabib Nurmagomedov, who makes the two lads look like altar boys, to be honest with you. And there's a weird dynamic to the whole story, because what you'll find with someone like a Colby Covington or a Sean Strickland, any of these like controversial fighters within the UFC now, everybody feels emboldened to go after them. Everybody has an opinion on them. We have UFC fighters talking trash about them on social media. We have UFC fighters talking trash about them within interviews. We have the media themselves like coming in hard on controversial opinions by Sean Strickland. And like you kind of look at Khamzat Chimaev or Conor McGregor or even Khabib Nurmagomedov and you're like, this is interesting that nobody touches these lads, right? Especially Khabib and Khamzat Chimaev. Nobody seems to go after these guys. I wonder why. There might be a little bit of privilege there that we're not aware of. I don't know. But we're going to have a look at the Khabib stuff because I just went through it. I've got 100 windows open and it's crazy. He's been in the news recently, as we know, right? So the news stories of late with Khabib Nurmagomedov are tax evasion. Russian government want to retrieve 3 million in taxes, which Khabib is not interested in paying. So the official story or narrative goes that he has bounced out of Russia. He is exiled. He is on the run and he has gone to United Arab Emirates, just like the other rat, Khamzat Chimaev, all scurrying away to these places. Now, what's interesting about it in terms of the way this is portrayed in the media is that every time you type in Khabib Nurmagomedov to try get a little bit of insight into the tax evasion, changing of citizenship over to United Arab Emirates, all you get hit with is Conor McGregor goes after Khabib on Twitter. That's literally what you get across Google searches, right? Which is kind of interesting. It's almost like they're running cover for the actual story. We'll have a look here. Look, Conor goes after him. Scammers. He's talking about Dustin Poirier and he's also talking about Khabib. Khabib is a terrorist in serious debt with his own country, which he is now exiled from. You couldn't make this shit up. Dustin is a fool and an asshat, right? Fine. Broke scammers alert. He also goes here, like in terms of when Khabib put out the message of the rivalry between myself and Conor McGregor will never end. Conor retweets that just a couple of days ago and he's like, fast forward, he has since abandoned, betrayed and fled Russia entirely, leaving his children and mother and wife / cousins behind. And it's very interesting and funny that Conor keeps going after him and reigniting this rivalry. He doesn't seem to be quitting. And if we look back at one of the most infamous press conferences in the history of the UFC, the Conor McGregor Khabib Nurmagomedov one has to be up there, where Conor is there and he's sipping the proper 12 and he is spitting facts at Khabib about his past affiliations with crime lords, warlords, gangsters, terrorists, and he really goes in hard. At the time and after that, you were kind of looking at that thing going, Genie, Conor's kind of gone off the rails, isn't he? This is like after the bus attack and Conor was kind of on that decline in terms of always been drunk or always been jazzed up. And people just looked at that press conference and they kind of took in what he was saying, but not really because they weren't told to pay attention. That's what I alluded to earlier. If it was Sean Strickland and he was calling out some LGBTQ mentally ill person, we would have been told to pay attention because it would have been a detriment to the UFC. But as I said, there is privilege involved with these lads from this certain region and we were told to forget about it, I guess. We heard Conor McGregor spitting venom about Ali Abdalaziz and the guy is a bit slimy. The guy is a bit of a douchebag. You see him in interviews, you see in interactions with other fighters. He's one of the most prominent managers in the business. And you have to ask the questions like Conor did in the press conference, very erratically, but we might try to do it a little bit calmer here. Why is this guy allowed into the United States of America? Why is he allowed to be the manager of all the biggest fighters in the UFC? Why is he allowed to be so prosperous and have so much monetary gain from his nefarious past? That's the question we should be asking, right? MMA's biggest manager, Ali Abdalaziz, was pulled off a flight for treacherous connections to Twin Towers. Interesting headline, right? And in terms of doing the research yourself, that's something that I would advise. There's a ball of it to be done on this guy and everyone else we're going to talk about. So as I said, I've got 100 windows open. I'm going to read a little bit from each window and just have a little introspective look at Khabib's affiliations and and how nobody talks about it. Abdalaziz was born in Egypt, where he found that he had some passion for martial arts. Whilst his earlier life was rather obscure, he came under the radar of the FBI and other intelligence agencies on 9/11. Ali originally boarded a flight headed from Cairo to New York on the same day that the two planes struck the Twin Towers, with two additional planes being captured, one targeting the Pentagon, the other one heading towards the US Capitol building. This segment here goes on to detail everything that happened on that day. I won't read it because it'll probably get me flagged, but we jump to here. Ali Abdalaziz works as an informant for the FBI and the NYPD. Cool. So the title of rat really does fit this dude, right? Whilst most of these lads that took these planes were from Saudi Arabia, at least one of them was from Egypt, and it's understandably led to some suspicion towards Ali, who conveniently booked a flight from New York on the same day. He was eventually allowed to enter the US under suspicious circumstances to start an unsuccessful career in Colorado. Once it became clear to the FBI that Ali had some connections to the incidents on that day, regardless of how minor, he was offered amnesty and he worked as an agent for the US. He was originally hired by the New York Police Department to spy on armed groups of Muslims of America, based in Islamabad and the outskirts of New York. The NYPD would share him with FBI, who quickly terminated his services, suspecting him of being a double agent. As the story goes, it's alleged that he was spying on Muslims of America, which was a group that had some nefarious outcomes in mind when it came to what they were trying to get done. He was supposed to be a double agent. He was part of them. He was working for the FBI. He was working for the NYPD. And when the FBI suspected that he was a double agent, he was allowed go. And not only was he allowed go, he actually used the money that he was given by the US government, by NYPD and the FBI and whatever other intelligence agencies were using him. So he was given money for being a rat on his own Muslim people to form Dominance MMA, and went on to become one of the biggest MMA managers out there. And the dude's face is front and center of the UFC. Every event you see him, he's there with his rat's face. And I can actually say that with some confidence because the dude's career consisted of working as a rat for agencies, ratting on his own people and profiting from it, then getting to become very prosperous manager within the MMA community. Interesting how that works. Interesting how we don't have like feminist reporters that seem to be front and center of the UFC and MMA coming out calling him out. I don't hear anybody going after him and asking questions about his past, but we always hear people asking questions about the likes of Sean Strickland. Wonder why. That brings us over here to another one of Khabib's buddies, we'll say. Vladimir Putin gave Khabib Nurmagomedov $20 million in property after the Conor McGregor fight. The biggest box office in UFC history was lucrative for Nurmagomedov in more than one way, according to Dana White. Putin gave him and his father $20 million worth of property in Russia. He then went on to the Muslim territories where these guys like cars and money and gyms or whatever they wanted. The alleged gifts from Putin went a long way for remedying the €500,000 Nurmagomedov fine on that evening when he was penalized for leaping into the crowd and having a brawl with Dylan Dennis. So $20 million worth of property was given to Khabib and his father after the Conor McGregor fight. And you're kind of like, okay, so let's start painting pictures here. He's got his manager, who is Ali Abdalaziz. The dude works for the government as a snitch and as a rat, ratting on his own Muslim people. Khabib is a very passionate Muslim guy, and he has formed this really tight affiliation with Ali Abdalaziz. Okay, so that's where we are there. We're also taking $20 million off of Putin for properties, for cars, for gyms, for all that sort of stuff, right? So we have them two tight-knitted guys tied in together, Ali Abdalaziz and Vladimir Putin. That brings us to the next affiliation, which is Yavid Magomedov. This is someone we heard Conor McGregor spitting as loud as you could imagine during that press conference, and it's not very hard to go and find out that this guy is a Russian oligarch. He is deep into everything. The guy is currently serving like 20 years in prison for embezzlement and dodginess. He has been funding Khabib Nurmagomedov from the very beginning, paying for surgeries, paying for cars, paying for gyms. He is tightly interjected into Khabib's career, and there's no doubting it. We actually saw Khabib Nurmagomedov get on the mic in the octagon after one of his victories and ask Vladimir Putin to release this dude from prison. I don't really remember anyone going, oh my god, why is this happening? Should we actually have a conversation about whether this is legitimate for the UFC? No, it just kind of slid under the radar like everything else. I'm literally just tipping on these guys. Go and do the research yourself. It's actually amazing that he's tied in with so many criminals and dodgy dudes. It's mental. It's absolutely mental. And of course you couldn't be one of these Dagestani Muslim boys in the UFC without having connections to Ramzan Kadyrov. Just like Khamzat Chimaev, he was tied in with the Chechen leader. There was gifts, there was cars, there was properties. All that was there with Khabib as well. So let's do the list so far. We have Kadyrov, Putin, Magomedov, Ali Abdalaziz. Every single one of them are criminals or could be alleged criminals. Khabib is balls deep in the middle of all these lads. But we have one more little icing on the cake here when it comes to more criminality and more dudes that this guy likes to hang out with. Khabib also has a very tight relationship with Bahrain Prince, part of the monarchy, Sheikh Hamdan Khalid, and this guy has a very interesting past. I guess another money-making scheme was kind of concocted with these boys, and Khabib bounced over there, did a bunch of press, became an ambassador for this guy's MMA organization out there in Bahrain. Big press conference, Khabib announced it all, and he was tightly wound in there with this guy. Who exactly is this guy? What's his background? Could it quite possibly be something dodgy? Something that involves criminality, something that might not be as like kosher as we'd expect? But if we jump over here, we have Amir of Qatar's brother is accused of ordering staff to end Americans on US soil, beating his chauffeur to death, going on drug binges, assaulting male people who work in that industry with a pool cue, and he's also accused of this and this in the US. There's the dude. And you just keep on putting pieces together of who Khabib is hanging out with. Now, at this stage, I can't even go back and recount them. Was there Ali Abdalaziz, terrorist? Magomedov in prison for embezzlement, absolute billionaire, tied into all sorts of criminality across Russia. Putin is what he is, and he's after giving Khabib 20 million. Sheikh Khalid, I don't know what he was giving him, but he was giving him something because they were tied in together with this organization out in Bahrain, and the dude is absolutely shockingly nefarious when it comes to criminal activity. Oh yeah, and he was tied in with Ramzan Kadyrov, just like Khamzat Chimaev. So, wow. That's a long list. That's a very long list of people that this dude is tied into. And trust me, right? I've got 15 windows open here. There's so much more that you can go down the rabbit hole of. There's so much more to criminality involving this guy. The tax evasion, bouncing to the United Arab Emirates. We also had a story as of recent where there was an attack on a couple of Christian Orthodox churches and a synagogue in Dagestan. And it was believed that one of the perpetrators of this disgusting, heinous act was actually a member of Khabib's team. Khabib actually responded to this and he said, "This guy is not our student." It's absolute nonsense. It's not true. Yes, he had a camp at the gym at some point, maybe for a couple of months, but he was never part of the team. And this was highlighted a lot in YouTube videos, and people were doing deep dives into it last week. I think it's important when we jump over here that we see that this MMA fighter was linked to UFC star Khabib Nurmagomedov, and he's also a militant who went after the people in Dagestan during that attack, right? Kadyrov is his name, MMA fighter affiliated with Khabib Nurmagomedov, and his late father was amongst the people who were doing this heinous act there last week. Khabib quickly came out. He just said, look, it's nonsense. The media fell in behind Khabib and said, yeah, of course, there was no connection. And when you go online, you see a bunch of people in Reddit and on Twitter, and they're all in the comment section going, oh, you're crazy. You can't be linking these two people together. You're this phobe and that phobe. I scanned down here, first article with the dude, and I came across something that I believe refutes everything that Khabib said about his linkage to that gym and saying that he might have had a couple of months training in there. Right on like maybe the first or second paragraph, we have Kadyrov, 28, was a master of sports, honorary title for successful athletes in Russia. Cool. In freestyle wrestling, he transitioned into professional MMA after being coached by Vladimir Nurmagomedov. Obviously, that's Khabib's father. He accumulated a 2-0 pro record whilst representing Khabib's Eagle MMA Fight Club, a training facility founded by jailed Dagestani oligarch Magomedov, who we spoke about earlier. So he was trained by Khabib's father in wrestling. I don't know how long that took. Then he had a couple of fights. He was fighting under the banner of Eagle MMA Fight Club. And we jump back over here and we can see that he was never part of the team. It's nonsense. And nobody asked any more questions. We're just led to believe that that's actually what happened. I reckon if you're training under Khabib's father in wrestling, then you're there for a lot longer than a couple of months. And especially if you had 2 pro fights, given the fact that we have fight camps that last for maybe 2 or 3 months, the dude was part of Khabib's team. So there is some serious dodgy correlations between everything that we covered here. Khabib seems to be balls deep in criminality, allegedly. And I thought it was interesting to scratch the surface, just scratch the surface, and have a little look at what Conor seems to be ranting and raving about for years now. As I said, jumbled up video. If it made sense, like, subscribe and share. Cheers.